Ladies and gentlemen, US President Joe Biden is all set to visit Israel, remember, not just US President, but also French President making that beeline. Geopolitical shift essentially taking place, but also there is a growing pressure on Israel. Whether at all there's going to be any sort of ceasefire to begin with. You've had a Malaysian Prime Minister making that stunning comment saying that perhaps it is time for a corridor to be created from Rafah, and not just that, create a humanitarian assistance or a humanitarian corridor so that the entire evacuation process can take place. But the Malaysian Prime Minister also says that there is full support for the Hamas. Joining us on this broadcast is a very special guest, parliamentarian from the ruling coalition, Mr. Moshe Roth. He is also, remember, part of the Defense Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Parliament of Israel. Mr. Roth, thank you very much for joining us on this broadcast. Let me straight away begin by asking you with regards to the latest developments taking place. Malaysian Prime Minister calls in for ceasefire. Similar sort of sentiments emerging from other Western nations too. How do you really look at a situation when Israel has been saying that, look here, we are not fighting the Palestinians, but we are only fighting a terrorist organization called the Hamas?
Good evening to you and good evening to all your listeners. And thank you for having me to understand the concept of when we're talking about the organization and when we're talking about the civilians. This is very important to understand that Hamas is controlling the Gaza totally. Every word that is being spoken in the media from the Gaza is controlled by the Hamas. The people are controlled by Hamas. The children are controlled by Hamas. The Hamas puts civilians. They force civilians to live on missile sites. They force children to be in the war. They push civilians. They don't let civilians to leave Gaza. They are controlling in the most inhumane way. They are controlling Gaza. And that is the real problem, that there's nobody to talk to because these people are so inhumane. I am coming right now from the south of Israel. I visited villages where people have been burned. Children have been killed and burned. Mothers and children have been tied their hands and burned. This is unbelievable. This is beyond what human want. Peace. We want stability. But there's nobody with who we could have that kind of partnership. And that is the real problem. The real problem is that there's nobody to talk to. So when we want to make diplomatic solutions, on the other side there's organization, there's this evil ISIS organization that wants to eliminate the Jewish people. That is the problem. The problem is they have a charter to kill as many Jews as possible, God forbid.
Mr. Roth, as a member of the Defense Committee, I would like to ask you this question with regards to what next, given the fact that there is also growing pressure on Israel at this point in time with regards to a ceasefire to be called in so that the evacuation can take place. Keeping that in mind, the entire plan that you have that there could be a possible ground offensive, do you think that has been put on the back burner for some time?
The only thing that would have any meaning to this Israel would be stability. If there's anybody, if it's anybody in the international community who could bring it to a position where we won't have missiles from Gaza, we are willing to listen to. And we are the ones that are waiting. We have 2 decades. We are waiting for 2 decades for somebody to stop the missiles being sent from the Gaza to Israel. Thousands of missiles. Every resource in Gaza is used only for destruction. We sent to them pipes to make a sewer, but they took these pipes and turned them into missiles. They take every resource they have, everything the European community sent to them, money, whatever, was always used for vicious killing, for the most evil of deeds. So, and if we are not interested to, we don't want to occupy Gaza, we don't want to destroy Gaza. That's not what we're looking for. We want to live in stability. We want to live in peace. So if Gaza will stop today to send missiles, and if Gaza won't be a place, a terror community, we don't have any interest to have any ground offensive. So if it's the European community or it's the United States or whoever it may be wants to take control of Gaza, we are fine with that. But since this hasn't happened till now, we don't have any other choice but to take this offensive.
I'll just request you to stay on with us. I would also like to introduce our guest from US, Michael Tracy. Michael Tracy, thank you for joining us. You've heard what Member of Parliament Moshe Roth had to say with regards to how exactly can you call in for a ceasefire at this point in time, given the fact that you have the Hamas, which continues to launch the rockets from Gaza, and more importantly, targeting civilians in Israel. So for those, especially in the West and even South Asian countries like Malaysia, who are now calling in for a ceasefire, perhaps essentially want to weaken this entire fight against terror.
Well, he says that Israel is not seeking to destroy Gaza. But if that's the case, why is it that the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom is going around on media appearances saying that what is to be expected in terms of what Israel will unleash in Gaza is comparable to what the United States and the United Kingdom unleashed on Dresden in World War II, which was an aerial incineration of residential areas deliberately to destroy the morale and also the physical infrastructure of that population. Now, I'm not trying to bring up the morality of World War II necessarily. It's a separate debate. The point is that the Israel officials themselves are saying that we should be on the lookout for destruction of gargantuan proportions. So I'm not sure what the member of parliament here, or the member of the Knesset rather, is suggesting in terms of the kindness and restraint with which Israel is planning on approaching this issue, because all indications point to it being an incredibly brutal and elaborate offensive. Now, if that's not what they're planning, maybe he could break some news on the broadcast live right now and let us know that it's going to be much more circumscribed than what other government officials have been proclaiming on their media appearances. But all evidence that I'm aware of now points to something that's destructive on the order of World War II. Otherwise, why would they be constantly bringing up World War II analogies to prepare the publics of the United Kingdom and the United States to brace for that level of destruction?
Okay. Moshe Roth, if I can once again bring you in with regards to the growing fear that many have at this point in time. Whether at all there would be some back-channel talks with Ankara, and if that happens, and even in Doha, that would essentially mean that you will take a step back. Do you believe that there is growing pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu perhaps to reconsider what he says, the fight against terror to wipe off Hamas? Would that essentially mean that he would go slow?
First, the question is a very good question. That's exactly the point, and I want to go back to what this journalist was saying, and I appreciate everything he said, because that's exactly the point. The analogy to the Second World War, the analogy to Nazism is exactly that one. That until the world didn't recognize the evil of Nazism, and until the world didn't recognize the importance of eradicating Hitler, the whole world kept on suffering. But it's only when the world recognized the importance of eradicating totally an annihilation of everything that has to do with Nazism, that's only when the world was saved. And this is exactly the point. And I want to emphasize that.
So you're planning on an annihilation. You're planning on an annihilation. Is that right?
We have, on one hand, we have a sword, and on the other hand, we have the building blocks. Do you know that every piece of cement that is in the Gaza today, in every building block, was provided by Israel. Gaza used to be a place where I myself used to sit on the beach in Gaza and eat grapes together with Arabs. That was before the Hamas came into the picture. Gaza
I understand, sir, and that's tragic, but I'm trying to get down to brass tacks in terms of
Michael Tracy, I'll just request you to... Michael Tracy, Michael Tracy, I'll just request you to stay on. Michael Tracy, I'll just request you to allow Moshe Roth to make his point. Allow him to make his point, and then you can respond.
The question is a good question, and the answer is simple. Yes, this evil regime, this evil terror organization will be annihilated with God's help. Yes, it will happen. And the reason is because after 2 decades of suffering, enough is enough. And now is the time for the whole world to unite together and to stand with Israel, to be on the right side of history. It's the good and evil. There's nothing in between. It's black and white. So it's not Gaza that is the issue. It's the Hamas that's the issue. Hamas is ISIS, but Hamas is controlling Gaza. So therefore, there's no other way but to definitely make sure that Hamas leaves Gaza for good. And that's exactly the motive, and that's exactly the whole purpose of this operation. And this is going to happen.
Okay, so
Michael Tracy, I'll give the opportunity for you to respond, but just a quick follow-up question to Mr. Moshe Roth, because he's also a member of the Defense Committee. So I believe that this is a question that he's most suitable to answer. Mr. Roth, you say that Hamas is ISIS. There's absolutely, there's no debate about it. But the question is that while they enjoyed political power, many would say that did Israel actually become complacent about the Hamas by not really looking into what was really happening, what was Hamas's main motive? And you could have done this long back. By not being complacent, perhaps, you've had your field agents inside Gaza. What made you so very confident that Hamas was busy governing Gaza? Let's not forget, all this while, Hamas was not really governing Gaza. Hamas was preparing to strike against Israel.
Okay. Thank you for your question. And that is, yes, I admit, and I want to say we are to blame. We, Israel, we, the free world, are to blame that we in a naive way, let this evil grow. Definitely, we should have eradicated Hamas 20 years ago. We would have done that 20 years ago. We would have saved a lot of bloodshed. And that definitely, yes, I admit that we made a huge mistake by having this concept that these people have any interest in stability, or they will be more willing to work for prosperity for their own people rather than using their own people for vicious, malicious killing and murdering other children. We made that mistake because we have a weakness for peace. We have a weakness for the good, for the kind, and for the lovely. And I want to point out the irony, and this is this irony is so piercing that the irony is that these villages that have been attacked so viciously and in such an inhumane way these villages are the people who are the most left-wing, extreme left-wing in the Israeli society. They are the ones who are constantly promoting the idea to help the people in Gaza, to help these Arabs, to help there are some people over there who are constantly volunteering on behalf of the people in Gaza. The irony of this is unbelievable, that these people who were supposedly their best friends, the people who cared so much about the Arabs, right, that they were the ones who were attacked so viciously. Houses and people were burned. So the point is that when we're talking about such an inhumane organization, There is no other solution unless we have an international community, be it Arab or whatever, that will be able to take control of Gaza and have the Hamas removed, totally removed from Gaza. The last thing, we don't want bloodshed, we don't want war. Our children are being sacrificed on this war. We don't want that to happen. We strive for stability, for peace and quiet. That's what we want. This war was forced upon us in the most vicious way.
Mr. Roth, I'll just request you, because your frame that we're getting is completely dark. I believe that you're traveling. If you can just perhaps switch on the light inside the car, that would help us to at least see your frame. But while we do that, let me just quickly take one word from Michael Tracy also. Michael Tracy, I want to talk a little bit about the hypocrisy of the West on this entire part. On the one hand, you have US President Joe Biden basically sanctioning the military assistance that he had provided to Israel. On the other hand, saying that there is a rule of war. Yes, there is a rule of war, but let's not make a mistake. Today it is Israel fighting against a terrorist group like Hamas. Tomorrow it could be someone else completely. So let's understand that perhaps the world should have spoken in a united manner in this fight against terrorism, which every country today suffers. Even we here in India suffer from this Islamic terrorism that we have seen, which has destroyed several generations.
Well, your other guest, I just want to mention, was right to point out the cruel and tragic irony in that the kibbutzim that were targeted by the Hamas fighters were probably the last remnants of the old, more socialistic form of Israeli left-wing villager who, he's right, probably sought more of a peace and reconciliation type attitude toward the Palestinians than others in Israeli political society. And for them to have been slaughtered so brutally really is one of the most heinous parts of all this, or at least one of the most tragically ironic parts. But I do want to focus on something that he said in terms of the World War II analogy, and then I'll get to the other question, because I think it's extremely important. And given that Joe Biden, our president, is headed off to Israel for one of his triumphant wartime visits, just like he went to Ukraine earlier this year, maybe somebody will pass along this information to him straight from the mouth of somebody who's on one of the defense panels in the Knesset. What your friend Mr. Roth said was that just as Dresden was annihilated because Dresden, Germany was controlled by Nazi Germany, it wasn't just the Nazis that were annihilated in that aerial bombardment campaign. It was the entire civilian population and all their houses and their apartments and their shops and everything else, schools. It was all annihilated. So in calling for the annihilation of Hamas, because it controls Gaza, he is calling for the just broad-scale annihilation of the Strip. Now, they can try to make a distinction there for appearance's sake, because it sounds better to international audiences to not say, oh yeah, we're just sadistic and we want to just flatten all of Gaza and we don't care if we kill children and babies. But that's effectively what they're endorsing, and that's what Joe Biden is about to endorse.
Okay, Michael, I think so.
But you're right. That it's another sign that there's really no standardized international law system that governs any
Michael,
of this.
I'm running out of time, so I'm sorry to interrupt. Michael, I'm sorry I had to interrupt you, but I'm really running short of time. But I just want to give one final word to Moshe Roth. While you respond to what Michael Tracy had to say, I want to also take you one more question with you, Mr. Roth. That is, while almost everyone that I spoke to from Israel said that this is going to be different. You've had multiple wars, in fact, almost 5 wars in the last 15 years with Hamas. You said that this is going to be different. When you say it is going to be different, are we to now believe that you're all set for that ground offensive, which would essentially mean that Israeli troops are going to enter Gaza?
I want to refer to what Michael said so explicitly. Michael, I do want to put in an important piece of information. Israel has asked for the civilians of North Gaza to leave to South Gaza. Israel is willing to help as soon as all those civilians are in South Gaza. Israel is willing to help them for humanitarian aid and to have them have a safe passage to Egypt or whatever kind of sort of construction could be worked out. So that's the big difference. That not only we don't target the civilians, we want the civilians to leave. The civilians have been, and many have done so, and part of the reason why the ground offensive hasn't started yet was just to give the chance for all those civilians to leave this part of Gaza. That's one important difference between what happened in the Second World War. But and this is also in the answer to your question, if I may, that the truth is that there comes a time when things become so, there's a fine line, but it's definitely there's a difference between the evil and the good, which brings the good people to do this kind of destruction, because sometimes there's no other solution. And in the long term, we know definitely that in the long term, what happens every time we let the evil organizations, these terrorist organizations grow, it only becomes worse. But whenever the only way to eradicate and to stop this Islamic, I would say this Islamic terrorist, because not all of Islam is this way. But when we're talking about Islamic terrorists, we need the free world has to stand together in truth and in a fashion that would be the most, I would say in a strong armed fashion against this terrorism. There is no, this is not a precise a precise tool that we could have. That we need, and that's why definitely nobody wants war. But when we know there's going to be damage, we definitely know that, and we don't want that. But there's no other choice. There's no other choice, Mr. Tracy. This is the fact of the matter. This has been true every time that we face such a calamity. This has always been true. That there's no other choice.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the Trending Burning Question. That was parliamentarian Moshe Roth and Michael Tracy joining us on the Trending Burning Question. On the other side, the big debate with Editor-in-Chief Arnab Goswami.